Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into the complete chronological journey of one of the most defining political figures of the 20th century, Ronald Reagan. We are going to trace his entire life, literally from the time he was born in a tiny apartment in Illinois, all the way to his death and his final, lasting legacy on the global stage. By looking at this full arc, we're going to uncover exactly how his deeply personal history inextricably shaped global history.
Okay, let's dive into this. Our roadmap for today covers 5 key phases. 1. His humble Illinois beginnings. 2. The Hollywood and corporate years. 3. The political rise. 4. The White House years. And finally, 5. His final chapter and legacy.
All right, Section 1. Humble Illinois beginnings.
Born in 1911 in a small apartment above a general store in Tampico, Illinois, his early life was, well, pretty nomadic. His father, Jock, was a shoe salesman who was constantly searching for work until the family finally settled down in Dixon, Illinois in 1920. Now, it wasn't an easy upbringing by any stretch. His father struggled with severe alcoholism, which Reagan later described as a deeply searing experience. But stepping out from that shadow, his youth was actually remarkably active. By the time he enrolled at Eureka College in 1928 and graduated in 1932, he was a student body president, a football player, and a true campus leader. A massive counterweight to the instability at home was his mother, Nell. She was deeply committed to the disciples of Christ and the social gospel. Nell was this relentless community organizer, visiting prisoners, helping the poor, and directing local drama recitals. She profoundly shaped his religious convictions, his sense of compassion, and, absolutely crucially, his early comfort with stepping out in front of a crowd.
Now, what's really interesting about this number here, 77, is that it represents the exact number of people he saved from drowning. As a young man, Reagan spent 6 summers working as a lifeguard on the treacherous Rock River. This wasn't just some casual summer job to pass the time. It was an early, defining period that instilled in him a very localized sense of heroism and personal responsibility, traits he'd carry forward for decades.
Moving right along to Section 2, Hollywood and corporate years. After college, Reagan leveraged that famous, resonant voice into a job as a radio sportscaster over in Iowa. He was actually so good at recreating baseball games using just telegraph updates and his lively imagination that by 1937, while out covering a Chicago Cubs spring training trip in California, he managed to land a screen test and a contract with Warner Brothers. He transitioned from regional radio straight to the silver screen, eventually acting in over 50 films. And he wasn't just acting either. By 1947, he became the president of the Screen Actors Guild, stepping up to lead a major labor union during a deeply turbulent time for Hollywood. His most critically acclaimed role came in the 1942 film King's Row. He played Drake McHugh, a man who wakes up to find his legs have been amputated by a sadistic doctor. Reagan delivers this desperate, iconic line, "Where's the rest of me?" He delivered it with such dramatic flair that the quote just stuck with him for life. In fact, it became so iconic he later used it as the exact title for his own 1965 autobiography. As his film career eventually slowed down, he successfully pivoted to television and corporate America. And 139 is the massive number of General Electric facilities across 40 different states that he visited between 1954 and 1962. Hired as the host of General Electric Theater and GE's traveling ambassador, Reagan spent hundreds of hours talking to factory hands and corporate management alike. He addressed an estimated 250,000 GE employees during this incredible run. And this brilliantly illustrates a real turning point. Those years on the road triggered a massive ideological shift. See, Reagan actually grew up in a family of Democrats and initially supported Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. But as his income grew, hitting historically high marginal tax rates, and as he spent years on the road speaking with GE executives about government regulations, his entire worldview transformed. He went from a New Deal Democrat to an unapologetic conservative Republican, warning crowds on the speaking circuit about the dangers of encroaching control while staunchly defending the free enterprise system. Which brings us to Section 3, the political rise. His formal ascent into politics was just incredibly rapid. In 1964, he delivered a nationally televised speech called A Time for Choosing, which instantly launched him as a leading conservative figure in America. Just 2 short years later, in 1966, he was elected governor of California. And by 1980, running on a platform of tax cuts and a strong national defense, he secured a massive landslide victory against incumbent Jimmy Carter to become the 40th president of the United States.
But before taking that national stage, his tenure as California governor from 1967 to 1975 really showed how he governed in practice. Interestingly, despite his famous anti-tax rhetoric, he actually raised state taxes to balance the books, successfully turning a massive state budget deficit into a surplus. He was also known for a very hardline stance on law and order, implementing strict crackdowns on university student protests, most notably at Berkeley.
Next up, Section 4, the White House years.
Just months into his first term, on March 30th, 1981, Reagan was shot by John Hinckley Jr. He arrived at the hospital right on the absolute margin of death, but recovered remarkably quickly. Surviving that assassination attempt had a profound internal effect on him. It deeply instilled this unshakable belief that God had spared his life for a specific, chosen mission that he was uniquely meant to fulfill in the Oval Office.
So the crucial point is that his domestic policy left a deeply complex legacy. He implemented Reaganomics, a supply-side economic theory centered on sweeping tax cuts and massive deregulation. Now, while this absolutely stimulated periods of economic expansion and reduced inflation, it also, combined with a huge surge in military spending, led to a significant increase in the national debt. Socially, his administration oversaw a major expansion of the war on drugs and concurrently faced intense criticism for a very slow administrative response to the devastating emerging AIDS epidemic.
On the global stage, his early presidency was defined by a highly assertive, even aggressive foreign policy posture. Reagan explicitly shifted away from the previous era's policy of détente. Instead, he chose to escalate the Cold War and the arms race. He championed the Strategic Defense Initiative, ordered the military invasion of Grenada in 1983, and authorized the bombing of Libya in 1986, fiercely projecting American military strength globally.
However, this aggressive international posture also led to the defining scandal of his administration, the Iran-Contra affair. During his second term, it came to light that his administration had facilitated the secret and illegal sale of arms to Iran, a country strictly under an embargo at the time, and then used the funds from those sales to illegally support the Contra rebels fighting in Nicaragua. It was a massive controversy that cast a very significant shadow over his second term.
So, considering the intense escalation of the Cold War and the immense heavy weight of the Iran-Contra scandal, you gotta wonder, how did all of this impact his final years in office?
Well, it actually marked a fascinating pivot. His late-term foreign policy dramatically shifted toward intense diplomacy and arms reduction. Between 1985 and 1988, Reagan engaged in a rigorous back-to-back schedule of historic summits with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. Moving from Geneva to Reykjavik to Washington and finally to Moscow, this diplomatic marathon culminated in the landmark Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in 1987. That treaty directly contributed to the eventual historic end of the Cold War.
And finally, Section 5, final chapter and legacy.
Let's move to and see how this spells towards his final years. In his post-presidency, he made some surprising political moves, like openly supporting the Brady Bill for gun control in the early 1990s. In 1994, he bravely shared his diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease with the nation, bringing huge awareness to the condition. As his health gradually deteriorated over the next decade, he passed away from pneumonia complicated by Alzheimer's in 2004 at the age of 93. He was honored with a state funeral before being interred at his presidential library in California.
Today, the historical consensus views him as the ultimate icon of American conservatism. His 2 terms in office constituted a major political realignment in the United States, shifting the center of political gravity firmly toward conservative policies, deregulation, and free enterprise. His post-presidential approval ratings have generally remained high, cementing his really profound influence on the modern political landscape.
Which leaves us with this final thought. How does understanding a leader's entire life journey, from saving lives as a small-town lifeguard, to navigating Hollywood, to sparring with unions, to standing on the world stage, how does that change the way we view their ultimate legacy? It reminds us that history isn't just dry policy and politics, right? It's deeply personal. It's forged from birth to death by the very human experiences that shape the people who eventually shape our world. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.